Hello, sir. I have a query, sir.
Guys, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I hope you can hear me. If you have any questions, drop that in the chat box. I will respond to it. As per our last discussion, we understood few of the basics of the Spring Core module. I'll quickly revise these topics like 5 to 10 minutes, and then we will move on to the next sessions. Give me a minute. Okay. So what we discussed in the last class, the major bullet points are Spring is an application framework. Everyone knows that. Spring is a modular framework too, which means like Spring is divided into multiple modules. The advantage of this modularity is you can use only the modules that you want and leave the rest. Like just because you use some modules, you are not forced to use the full Spring framework. For example, I want to interact with the database using Spring, just use Spring Data JPA or Spring Data REST or Spring JDBC ORM. And don't use AOP, don't use MVC, don't even use Springboot. It's up to you. So that's the power of modularity. So you can just use whatever you want. And the base module for whole Spring framework is a core module. Now why? Because imagine you are developing a project. You will have a bunch of classes, like hundreds and thousands of classes. First, Spring has to understand your classes. Like you can have account class, customer class, or whatever the classes you want. Spring has to know about those classes. And Spring has to be able to create the objects for those classes and maintain it, or give the data for that class. And Spring Core module will help you to do all that stuff. The Spring Core module is to understand what classes you got in your project and which classes Spring has to maintain. For example, you have 1,000 classes, and Spring don't need to know all the 1,000 classes. It can, for example, you want only 500 classes to be maintained by the Spring. So just give those 500 classes to the Spring using Spring Core module. So that's why Spring Core module is the base. Once you give this information to the Spring Core module, then based on what you want to do next, the other modules will come into the picture. For example, I have an account class and I want to give these account details to the database. Then you can use the data access layer modules like Spring JDBC or Spring ORM, Spring Data JPA, Spring Data REST, all this kind of stuff. Or if you want to interact with the GUI like Angular or JSPs, HTMLs, then you will go for Spring MVC or REST controllers. So something like that. So Spring Core module is the base. And we understood some of the concepts of the Spring Core module in the last class. Like we have some bunch of classes, customer, hello world, student. Let's say only hello world. I want to tell only about this hello world. I want to tell to the Spring. Now how you can communicate with the Spring in this project? First, add the jars. So we added the jars here, all the Spring related jars, and then take one XML file, configure this hello world, or define this hello world inside this XML file.
Excuse me, sir. Actually, there is some background noise.
This is not the only option. This is not the best option at all. Okay. So yeah, this XML is not the best option at all because in Springboot you don't need this XML at all. There is an auto configuration. Now again, what is this XML is doing? It is telling to the Spring about our bean definitions, right? This is a common for all the projects. Your projects will have the classes and you need to give this information in the XML file. My project also has some classes and I need to do the same. I need to give my class details in the XML file. When this is a common thing for every project, why a programmer has to do this stuff? So what Spring people did, using Springboot module, they enable the auto configuration. So you don't need to configure this manually like this. Instead, Springboot will configure that for you. You don't have to do any XMLs anymore. But still, just for the legacy, I mean, just for the interview purpose, or if you are having a legacy project, like older versions of the Spring, and your project is using XML for some case, then for that purpose, we are learning this XML approach. We don't stick with this XML for long. So take the XML file, give this TTD, which will give all this, which will enable all the Spring rules for this XML, and then you can go and define all the beans. Next point, what we understood is the difference between a normal bean and Spring beans. What is a normal bean? I mean, what is a Spring bean? Any bean, any class that is maintained by the Spring. If Spring container is creating those objects, then that's a Spring bean. For example, student is maintained by the Spring. So student is a Spring bean. Other two are normal beans. In this Hello World project, I have 3 beans, but only student is a Spring bean. So the answer is, like, if a class is instantiated by the Spring, or if Spring is maintaining your bean, then you can call this as a Spring bean. That's an interview question, so keep that in mind. What are Spring beans? Any bean that is maintained by the Spring container is a Spring bean. How you can make it as a Spring bean? Just give these details in the XML file, or mark it with annotation, stereotype annotation. You will understand the annotations later. But now, give this information in the XML file. Now, once this XML file is ready with all your class details, you need to load this XML file using IOC container. So what is IOC container? In case of Spring, it's an application context. Why we call this as an inversion of control? Because you are not creating the objects, you are not maintaining these objects. You gave that control to the Spring. So that is called the inversion of control. Application context is an interface, and it has implementation classes. The implementation class we are using is a class path XML, because our XML file is in our class path, in our project class path. Now what this container will do, it will simply read our XML file and check all the details. Like for now, we have only 1 bean. Then it will create that bean and keep that inside the container. So what this line is doing, it is invoking our container, application context, IOC container. Container will create all the bean objects that you gave inside this XML file. So let's see what will happen now. Student is created. Maybe I have constructor inside the student. So that's why you can see, yeah, student is created. Okay, so Spring is a modular framework. Spring core is a base module. Spring core will talk about your beans, giving all the information in the XML stuff. That is a Spring core module. And why we are having this XML file? Because we need to communicate with the Spring to give all these details. Once you have this XML file, load this application context, IOC container, which will create your objects. The next points we understood is okay, so how to get this bean? In this line, Spring is creating the object. Now I want to use that object, which means inside that object I have some methods. I want to invoke those methods. In student, I have study method. So how you will invoke that method here? You don't have a student object here. Student object is inside the container. Now you need to ask the container, this context, to get that bean. Context dot get bean. So that's how you will ask the container to give you the bean. Now here, very important point. What is the name of this bean? Our student bean. Go to the XML file. The name of the student bean is ABC, which is not a good name. Let's say student. That's how you will ask, not with this class anymore. If I don't give this ID, then there is no option for you to call this, for example. Now, if you want to get this student, then you need to provide that fully qualified name. then only you will get the student. Remember, this student object is inside the container. Now I'm asking container, the IOC container, let's say IOC for your clarity's sake. Now I'm asking IOC, I want the student because I want to invoke the method of the student. Then IOC will give you your student object. Until then, it will not give. Unless you ask it, it will not give. It will just keep the object inside the container. So once you have the object, now it's okay. Here, important point. Once you get the student, Spring is dead. Like Spring job is done. Anything you are doing in the line number 17 is not for Spring anymore. It's your own code. You can write core Java, you can write EJB, you can write whatever you want. Spring job is dead here. I mean, Spring job is done. You already got the student, it's finished. Now what you want to do with this student? You can print like this, student.
Can you explain the 16th line again? Right?
You can get the details from the student, or you can save the student to database, or you can save the student to file system, or send the student to some other projects using web services. Do whatever you want. Spring job is done here. Spring core module job is done. Now why this is important? Because you need to understand what is Spring core module is. Spring core module gave you this object. That's it. Nothing else Spring core module can do now, unless you again ask something. I hope this point is clear, but I will repeat this point again whenever it is required, so you will get more clarity. Okay, now I'm going to call the method. Now this is a core Java. You have some method and you are calling that method. What is our method name? I think study. Yeah. So whatever is there inside the method, you will see in the console. It's boring. I hope it's not. So you will see that message in the console. Any questions so far? One last time I'm repeating. IOC container creating your objects and keeping it inside. Whenever you want, ask it. Get bean, give the name, and provide the casting. Once you get the object, Spring core module job is done. Now do whatever you want here, like I'm doing method calling. This is not a good idea to give this, leave this without the nickname, or you can say alias name. So it's better you give some alias name, nickname, like a student. As soon as you give the student, now this name doesn't work. You should not use that name. Now I'm using by force. You will get bean, no such bean definition exception. Check it. No such bean definition exception. This word is important because we are defining the beans in the XML, and Spring is saying there is no bean, no such bean definition exception. So no bean named, no bean named. This one is available. So you need to give the nickname. The nickname is student. So give that student here. This is annoying. Okay, guys, this is one important interview question. I just got that very recently in a written test. What is the difference between giving the casting as an argument or casting explicitly here? For example, if I don't give student that class, you already know what to do. You must typecast, right? Student. You don't see any difference in the output. You still see that method. It's boring. So what is the difference between providing the student here or here? Actually, there is no big difference in performance and stuff. But if you give typecasting here and you are giving the wrong name, for example, I have one more class and I'm asking that class, not my student. You will get class cast exception. Pay attention, it's kind of tricky. So let me give one more bean here. Bean class equals to com demo beans. What classes we have? Hello world. Let's give hello world. Hello world. ID equals to I will say HW, simple name. Okay. Now observe what I'm doing. I'm asking for HW. Think like a Spring. Assume you are a Spring framework. Then I'm asking you, Spring, can you give me HW? What it means? Inside the IOC container, is there any bean with the HW? Go and see. This is IOC container information, right? So what IOC will do, it will create the two objects, student and hello world, and it will keep inside with these names. Now I'm asking, Spring, give me HW. No problem, Spring will give you, but what it will give? Hello world. Go back. I'm typecasting hello world with student. So what will happen in core Java? Whenever you are trying to typecast one class with a different class, which is not in hierarchy, you will get class cast exception. I repeat, whenever you are trying to typecast one class with totally a different class, which is not in hierarchy, you will get class cast exception. So you are asking IOC, give me hello world. It will give, but you are typecasting with student, which is not a hello world. Both are different, and you will get class cast exception. Class cast exception. Now observe what will happen if I give the student here. Oops, stu dnt. Don't get confused. Go to the basics again. What you are doing here, you are asking Spring IOC, can you give me HW? It will check, is there any HW? Yes. Then it will give hello world. It's very simple. It will give hello world object. But you are trying to typecast with student app class, which is different. Hello world is different. Student is different. No way related. Now you don't get class cast exception. Instead, Spring will convert the class cast exception into some more meaningful exception. But everything else is same. It won't work. Just the exception is not core Java exception. It's a Spring exception, which is much easier for the developer to understand what's going wrong. Now observe what will happen. I'm not sure what is the exception name. I think it's kind of be not required type something. Let's see. Being not of required type exception. Now what is the advantage here? It's just kind of more readable. I mean, easy to understand what's going wrong. Instead of core Java class cast exception, which is totally general, like generic, no proper like explanation. Here you have meaningful Spring exception. Being not of required type exception. Being named HW is expected to be student. Other than this, there is not much big difference. Remember that you may get this kind of interview questions. So in the get bean, either you provide here or you can explicitly typecast. I prefer here because I don't want the core Java exceptions. I want some meaningful exceptions. I hope you understood this point. Next. Let's give student. Okay, everything is fine. Again, you can typecast here or here. If you are not typecasting here, if you're explicitly typecasting using like core Java, then you don't get the extra information. You will just get class cast exception. But if you give here, then you will get meaningful exception from the Spring, not just the core Java exception, which will tell you that what is going wrong. Okay, fine. So now we understood that Spring is creating these objects and we are giving them nicknames. So we must use only these names whenever we are calling getBean method. So Spring will give these objects. Next one. What else we understood in last class? I think this much, right? Okay. What if we have inheritance? This is also important. What I mean, let's say student is extending hello world. Some class is extending other class. So let me remove all of them. Now what will happen? Spring container will check this XML file. There is no beans. So empty container is created. Empty IOC is created now. So once I call this IOC, it will read the XML file. Nothing inside. So it will just create the empty file, empty container. You see, just a line. There is nothing inside. If you ask like IOC, can you give me HW or student, then container will say no such bean definition exception, because there is no bean defined with this student. No such bean definition exception. No bean named student is available. You already know that. But my point here is, let's give the student bean class equals to com demo beans. What will happen if I give some spelling mistake? Spring container will try to search your given class in this location, but there is no such class, right? Because there is no such path. So it is unable to find the class, and you will get class not found exception. That we understood in the last class, not a big deal. So let's give student, give some ID, student. Now what will happen? Spring will create the student object, and it will hold the object with this nickname. So once IOC is ready, it will create the object also. So you can see student is created. Now observe what I'm doing. I will extend the student class with some customer. It has nothing except the constructor. So if you see this customer is created message in the console, it means you need to understand object is created for customer. You know that, right? So in XML file, I only have student, no customer, but student is extending customer. Now, what you will do if you are a Spring? Let's assume like you are a Spring framework. Now I'm asking Spring, load your container, IOC. Then what you will do as a Spring, you will go and search this XML file, because I'm giving the XML file, and you will see, okay, how many beans we have, how many beans programmer is giving me. Programmer is giving me only student. So let's create the student. But whenever student is getting created, you noticed student is extending customer. So what you will do, you will create the customer, and then you will create the student. That is what our core Java inheritance, right? Superclass must be there. Even though I'm not giving you customer information here, I'm giving you only student information, but in order to get the student, you need a customer too. So now observe what will happen. Before only student, now you will see student with customer. Customer is ready, and then student is ready. So remember this point too for interview purpose. Let me remove this. All these are very simple points. Once you master all these things, you will use these points for understanding the further modules. Okay, now this is related to Java inheritance. There is also an inheritance concept in the XML file definition. Again, this is a interview question. What is the difference between bean definition inheritance and Java class inheritance? Java class inheritance is your normal core Java inheritance. Your subclass, superclass variables you can access in the subclass, normal story. And bean definition inheritance is no way, it has nothing to do with your core Java inheritance, totally different. What it means. Let me explain. So I'm removing everything in the XML file. Now empty container. Now what I will do, I'm going to write one more class. Let's say info, information. Here I will say private int ID, or let's say student just ID, private string name. That's it. Give setters and getters. I will explain in detail about these properties later with the when we are discussing dependency injection. For now, just remember info class have these two properties, and customer will also have these two properties: private int ID, private string name. and I'm not extending. I told you this inheritance has nothing to do with bean definition inheritance. Now I'm teaching you bean definition inheritance. Customer is an independent class. Info is an independent class. Both have these variables, ID and name. Let's give one extra property here. Private, I will give later. Now I will talk about only this customer and info. So for your clarity's sake, let me remove them. Now you will have more clarity. Info, independent class, ID and name. Customer, independent class, ID and name. Go and define these two inside the XML file. Start with info. Bean class equals to info. Remember fully qualified name or you will get exception. Class not found exception. Class not found exception info, because Spring is unable to find our info class in this SRC. I'm not giving the information here where this info is, so it is checking in the SRC. Give proper information. Com demo beans. Now it will create the info. You don't get exception. I think you don't get the constructor message because there is no constructor in the info, but it's working. And also I will give another class, customer, demo beans customer. Provide the nicknames, alias names. ID equals to info, ID equals to in customer. Okay, nothing strange new. You already know this stuff. I will create two objects now. You can't see constructor messages because there is no constructors, but both objects are ready. We don't see any exception here. Now what I will do, I'm using dependency injection. For those who already know Spring, for those who already know dependency injection, just follow up. For those who don't know dependency injection, don't get panicked. I didn't teach you anything about dependency injection yet. We will discuss that later. Now what is dependency injection is, this info has some dependencies, ID and name, like it has some properties. I'm giving the values of these properties in the XML file, as simple as that. So let's give properties, two properties, right? So give two properties. What are the names of those properties? ID and name, ID and name. Now what values you want to provide? Value equals to 101, value equals to Ganesh. Okay, so that's the information. So I have this info. How you will access these IDs once you create the object? For example, core Java info equals to new info dot get name for the name, info dot where is the get ID to get the ID, right? So you call these getter methods to get the values. Let's go and check it. I don't need to create the object, right? Because IOC is creating for me. IOC is creating this object and IOC is injecting these values. Now I want to try them. I want to print those values. IOC dot first get the object. What is the object name? Info get bean info. I prefer to have test here. Info dot class, which will give you our bean. Okay, now once you have this info, it's same like info equals to new info. Now you can call the getter methods. SOPR info dot get ID. You will get 101. Info dot get name. You will get the name Ganesh. Execute. 101 Ganesh. Nothing fancy. But now observe what I'm doing here. Customer also have these properties, right? ID and name. So same like info, customer also have this ID and name. And I'm not giving these values for my customer. What I will do, I will simply use parent is info. This is inheritance. Bean inheriting parent. So like parent child, exactly the same concept. Concept is same, but this is not a Java inheritance. Java inheritance is here inside the Java. This is XML. It's a bean definition inheritance. So all this information from my parent info, I'm inheriting to my customer. So you will get exactly the same values for the customer also. Even though I'm not giving any details to the customer, I will get exactly the same details. Now let's ask the customer. I will see this time I want customer get bean. Remember what is a customer ID? Customer. So this is the nickname. Oops, customer. Customer. Okay, now I'm asking, I will see, give me a customer. It will check, is there any customer? Yes, then create the customer object and it will give the customer. Not only that, you are giving additional information to the Spring. Parent is info. So all these details will get inherited to the customer. Even though I'm not giving the property values, it is inheriting from the info. Now if I ask the ID and name here, SOPR, customer dot get ID and customer dot get name, you will see exactly the same values. Execute. 101 and Ganesh. Why this is happening? Because of this parent. Let's remove it. So what will happen? Again, go and check what we are doing. IOC, give me a customer. It will check, is there any customer? Yes. Create the customer object and not giving any values. So these values will be default values. What is the default value for int in Java? 0. And string, null. So it is giving you customer object with the default values 0, null. It is not inheriting from the info. 0 and null. Because I'm not using this inheritance concept. In order to use it, parent equals to info. Now you will get the values. Same inheritance concept like overridden is also available. What it means? I'm not satisfied with this name. I want to change it, but I want to keep this ID. Only name I want to change. Then property, copy paste. Property name equals to name, value equals to change whatever the name you want, Ahmed. Now if you execute, you can see 101 Ahmed. Same, right? Superclass properties are by default available to the subclass. If you want, you can use, or if you don't want, you can override it. Exactly the same concept, but it's not a Java inheritance. It's a XML bean definition inheritance in the Spring. So the difference between Java inheritance and bean inheritance and bean definition inheritance is an interview question. Bean inheritance is a normal core Java inheritance. Bean definition inheritance is a Spring XML, I mean configuration inheritance. You have the same concept, not just in the XML. You have that in the annotations too. So you can give a template. Why I'm calling this template? It's dummy. And this template details you are going to inherit. Okay, last important point. If you want to make this as a template, like just to give some default data to every implementation, every bean definition implementation, then don't create this object because you are saying this is a template for you. If you want to make this as a template, don't create the object for this, because unnecessarily heap memory, or you are going to waste the memory. Is it making sense? This is my real object, and I'm saving the boilerplate code here. Instead of giving the details, I have this template. So from the template I'm inheriting. This is my real object. I don't want this object. This is just for me to give the default values for all the instances that is inheriting this info. Like you have student, and parent is info. Like this, you can have some hundreds of implementations, and you can inherit these values. So they are my original objects. This is not my original object. I don't need this. Then why you are creating the instance? Means Spring will create this instance whether you use it or not. That's what the job of the IOC. What IOC will do, it will check this XML, check how many beans we have, 3 beans, and it will create the instance for every bean. Now you can tell to the Spring, don't create this object because this is my template. I don't want you to use the memory for this object. You can do like this, abstract equals to true. And what will happen? Spring will not create the object for this info. You don't see any difference in the output. If I execute, let's remove the student. I don't have a student. First, let me give the student. I will show you what the new exception. Let's say there is no student. So now Spring will not create this object because abstract is true. Spring will create the customer. We have a customer. There is no student. See what will happen. I think you will get not class not found exception. No class def found error. Class not found exception. Okay, fine. It's the same exception. I will remove it. Okay. The Spring is not creating the object for this info because it's abstract. But you will not see any difference in the output. 101 Ganesh. The only difference is Spring is creating the object only for customer, but not the info. How we can make sure? Go and give the constructor. Info. SOPR. Info is created. Now, if you see this message in the console, what it means? Object is created for info. I gave abstract is true, which means you cannot create the object. Spring will not create the info object. Even though I have this constructor, it will never execute. Check it. You don't see that constructor message. But if I give constructor message in the customer, you will see the constructor message. So 2 beans, only this bean will be created, customer, but not info because of the abstract. No object for info, only customer object is created. So only customer object is created. Now let's remove the abstract. Now 2 beans, you are getting the inheritance support, but Spring will waste the memory for info object also. Check it. Now you see info object also. Info is created and customer is created. Now it's upon you. You need to decide if you want to make this as just a template to give this data for all the implementations, and you don't want this object, don't create it. Just give abstract is true. Then Spring will not create this object anymore. No info. I hope you are following this. Now observe what I'm doing. Because I'm giving abstract, right? There is no sense that I need to, it doesn't make sense that I need to give class. So I just remove the class. Even if you don't have the class, I can still use these properties. What Spring will do, it will check in the customer, is there any properties like ID and name? Go and check. in the customer, I have ID and I have name. So ID and name I got inherited. That's it. So important point for interviews. Not only interviews, this is an important point for you to understand in the Spring Core module. You can use the inheritance concept even in the configuration files, bean definition configuration files. When you have a bunch of classes with the same properties, instead of giving the values again and again, you can use this. But don't forget to give abstract equals to true if you don't want the template to be instantiated, to be created. I hope you are following so far. So let me know if you have any questions. I'm not getting questions. When you don't ask the questions, it means two things. You understood everything.
Hello,
or
can
you
you hear me?
understood nothing.
Hello.
In those two cases, you don't ask any questions. So I give you 2 minutes. If you have any questions, just let me know. I will explain, and then I will continue if you don't ask anything.
Hello.
I'm also sharing all the interview questions that I'm facing. I mean, I'm facing in the interviews so far. So I hope that will help you to, like, what is Spring Beans? Definite interview question. Like most of the interviews they will ask. Spring Bean is very simple. It's a Java bean, a normal Java class that is instantiated or maintained. Use any words you want. Normal Java class that is maintained by the Spring container. That's a Spring Bean. That bean can be anything. If it is maintained by the Spring, it's a Spring Bean. You don't need to give a proper definition like perfect English, perfect grammar. No, they only want to know whether you understood the concept or not. So just use your own words. Feel comfortable. Next, what is IOC? Again, this is one of the most important interview question. IOC stands for inversion of control. Instead of you creating the object, you giving this control to someone else. That's the inversion of control, nothing else. No fancy stuff here. You just don't create the object and give this control to some third party. In our Spring case, it's a Spring IOC, application context. So that's IOC. There is a big relation between IOC and dependency injection. You will understand soon. What I did here is a dependency injection. In particular, it's called property dependency injection. I didn't teach you dependency injection, so don't worry. I will again talk about this one elaborately in the coming classes. Next interview question, difference between bean inheritances and bean definition inheritance. Again, very important question. You must know this concept. Bean inheritance, you already know in the core Java. Superclass, subclass, superclass properties available in the subclasses. Superclass methods are available to the subclasses. You can override. Same concept is there in this bean definition inheritance also, but both are not same. This is Java, this is different. When you will use this bean definition inheritance, when you have multiple bean definitions and they are sharing the same values, now why you need to provide these values again and again in every bean? Like assume I have some 100 properties and all the 100 properties I'm using in this one. Assume like if that is a case, then why I need to do this again and again for every bean? Instead, take one bean and make that as a parent. And all the other beans, whoever want the same details, go and inherit. Parent equals to info. And also you don't want to waste this memory, so just give abstract equals to true. Then Spring will not create the object because we don't want this. This is just a dummy. This is a real object. If you don't want these values, you can always override those values. So that's the difference.
Hello.
Next, another interview question. Just I explained in the beginning of the session.
So
What is the
anyone
difference
else
between
can
giving the bean information here and here?
Hello.
There is no big
Can I-
difference functionality wise.
Hello.
But if you
Can I-
give here, you will get more information if something goes wrong. If you have interface approach, then this will make sense. You understood what I mean? If you have interfaces and implementation classes, then this is the best approach, because it will give you the more information, like this is not the type of this one, something like that.
Can you repeat this point once again?
What questions you ask, please respond to students.
This customer, another intro question you told, no? That one.
What questions you ask? I couldn't hear you.
Second question you told, this is also an
Guys,
interview
did you
question,
ask
right?
any questions? I couldn't hear you at all.
Hello? Can you hear me now?
The question is in the message or what?
Hello?
Hi, Ratan here. Increase the font size. Take the class a bit slow. They feel like fast. Okay. Please respond to the students. They are asking questions. I can't hear your voices. What kind of settings I need to enable? I can't hear you at all.
Hello?
I hope you guys can see my screen, right? So just tell me, check your audio. What you
Yes,
mean?
sir.
My audio is working. Screen sharing audio.
Hello?
Guys, I can't hear. Shrikant, can you speak? Can you say something in the voice call? I mean, voice message? I can't hear. There is something wrong, or I don't know. I'm new to this kind of stuff. Speaker, headset. Okay. I will. We will fix this problem. We'll sit with the admin and we'll fix this problem tomorrow. Today, you ask questions in chat, please, because I can't hear your voices. So, what was the question? Give me the question in the chat. Okay. No questions then?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Looks like
Hello.
he's not. He's not. You're not audible, I guess. Anubhav, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, guys. We'll fix this problem in tomorrow's class. Before tomorrow's class, I have one question for you. I mean, I'm attending many interviews here, so it may help you. So what you should do when you come tomorrow, sometimes some people can come like 5-10 minutes earlier, right? So you can post the answer for the question that I'm asking now. So I will ask every day one interview question that I'm facing here in foreign. So you get the answer for that and paste that in the chat box when you came to class tomorrow, and then start the discussion. Like other students can start the discussion on the answers. Like for example, I post my answer in the chat box, and then other student can reply on that answer. Like they can discuss why this answer is right, or how you explain why this answer is. Like you can have some discussion there before the class starts, like if you come earlier. So the question for today is, do you know the serialization, right? Serialization process. Like if you want to send your model object through the internet, through the network, or you want to serialize the data. I mean, you want to transfer the data to the file system. Then you have this serialization concept, right? In that you have an ID, serializing ID, serialization ID. In general, by default, ID is a 1K. Now, what happens if you make it 2K? So that's an interview question I recently encountered. So have a look on that, use your Google knowledge, or if you already know the answer, once you come to tomorrow's session, before the session starts, you can post the answer in the chat box so you people can discuss. Actually, it's an important question. So the question again, in the default serializing ID is like 1K. What will happen if you make it as 2K? So what are the differences? And I'm winding up today's session. Tomorrow agenda is we will discuss more about this bean maintenance, like how to give the life cycles for the beans. The scopes are very, very important. So we'll discuss about the scopes and inheritance. And if still time permits, we'll also discuss about dependency injection and what is this IOC and dependency injection house, what it has to do together, like why people are thinking both are same. If you see some internet articles, both sides, they say IOC and dependency injection both are same. Yeah, you can say that. Some people say it's same, some people say have minute differences. So we will dig deeper into what is that, like what is this IOC has to do with the dependency injection. Can they exist without each other support, all that stuff. So inheritance, life cycles, scopes, and dependency injection. Two types of dependency injections: constructor injection and method injection. Where exactly you will use that in the project. So that's our tomorrow's agenda. And what we discussed so far, we understood the Spring Core module is about the beans. Spring has to know you about your beans in your project. Once it understands the beans, then you can ask the Spring help to do what you want to do with that bean. So once Spring understood about the bean, then you can say to the Spring, can you store this bean to the database, or can you send this to someone else, some other projects, or you can show this to the GUI, or you can write some application-wise code using AOP. So first, Spring has to understand your beans. So that's our Spring Core module, and we understood some of the important concepts like inheritance in the XML file, or is the XML file important or not, typecasting, how to get the beans IDs. Okay, so see you tomorrow.